Hey, welcome to 1500ESPN.com. My name is Andrew Krammer. I want to thank you for joining me as we start the NFL Scouting Combine. Officially kicked off today, where offensive linemen, kickers, and punters ran through media drills. Didn't do any on-field work quite yet. That is going to start Thursday and run through next Monday. But all the media stuff is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Vikings general manager Rick Spielman spoke twice, and I'll go over kind of what we learned from there and in general what we've learned here at the Scouting Combine as it pertains to the Minnesota Vikings. First of all, the Vikings view this as a trenches draft, specifically the offense and defensive line, obviously known as the trenches. Personnel staff, scouts, the general managers spent about 13 hours, Rick Spielman said, going over just the defensive line, which is assumed to be one of their deepest positions on the roster right now. But don't rule out the fact that they might look at some defensive tackle depth, some defensive end depth, after Scott Crichton didn't work out in 2014, and after they were really scrambling last year with injuries to Linval Joseph, Sharif Floyd, and then obviously their backup nose tackle is Shamar Stephen, who they still really like. But they still are trying to bring in more bodies there just to have that depth, knowing how injury prone some of those guys up front can be. But let's turn and focus to the offensive line, which could be their number one pick at 23rd overall. I talked to Cody Whitehair, the Kansas State guard, who's really projected to be probably one of the best options available, at least at this point in February. And he said that he's already spoken with Tony Sperano, the O-line coach, twice at the Senior Bowl, and then talked to him yesterday, at the Combine Tuesday night, where they did some informal stuff. But they have 60 formal interviews to hand out, and so you're going to hear a lot of names that they're talking to. They're going to go back and forth between a lot of people, but they're going to focus on the offensive line. That's the position of need right now, a huge question mark on this roster, and something they really need to improve to bring that offense up to par with where this defense is, and really the defense, obviously, under Mike Zimmer is what carried them to an NFC North title in just the second year of this coaching staff. Entering the third year, they want to boost the offense. That is kind of the vibe. That's the focus of this draft going forward. They still want to have 10 picks, but I wouldn't be surprised if a bulk of them are spent on offense. That brings us to wide receiver, where Rick Spielman kind of said that, hey, don't be sold on us taking a 6'3", 6'4" guy just because we don't have anybody of that height on the roster right now. Yeah, this is cloak and dagger season, so be careful what you believe here. But according to the GM, if you believe them, they're not necessarily looking for a tall receiver. They're just looking for a playmaker. There's no guarantee Mike Wallace, last year's starter and a guy who took up the most reps at wide receiver, is going to be back at $11.5 million. And if he doesn't want to restructure, they could just let him go for no cost. So it's looking that might be the way that they go because, face it, there's no guarantee Mike Wallace wants to be in Minnesota after his role was so limited last year in this offense, and with Adrian Peterson still on the roster and not going anywhere. So right now they're looking at wide receivers, but not necessarily the 6'3" Laquan Treadwell out of Ole Miss or the 6'4" Josh Doxson out of TSU. That's not necessarily the guy they're looking at. They're just looking at playmakers, but it's not really a deep wide receiver draft. Although they took Stephon Diggs last year in the 5th round, and not many people mocked him to the Vikings, so we'll see who they end up with eventually. So to recap right now, they view it as a trenches draft. They're looking at wide receiver, but not necessarily height. And the third thing we learned here at the Combine's first day is that the Vikings are taking a step forward in terms of analytics, in terms of buying in to the analytics. That doesn't mean right now that they're hiring a bunch more people. They did that a couple years ago. They hired a consultant. You look at their coaching staff and their executives, you're not going to see a name or a title that says strategy officer like the Browns do, or analytics guy. You're not going to see that overtly, but what they do is they consult with people behind the scenes. They reach out to people, and they're not going to say publicly who that is, but they are reaching out. They're talking to more people about that. They brought in somebody onto the staff this year in more of an intern kind of role to take on more of an analytics, numbers crunching kind of role. But then obviously there's consultants they use. Rick Spielman said that one of the consultants brought up 17 algorithms for how to kind of roll these guys through and rank different prospects just in terms of numbers, not in terms of film evaluation. And so that's all a piece to the puzzle here that they're going to be bringing into the Combine. Now, when you're talking about 40 times, 3-cone drills, shuttles, they're going to be putting that all now into an analytics piece, and then that will tell them and maybe be a tiebreaker for, let's say they got 2 guys ranked at defensive end that are kind of close, but Danielle Hunter ran a really fast 40, so we're going to pick him in the 3rd round like they did last year. Jerick McKinnon in 2014, Danielle Hunter in 2015. Those were 2 guys where analytics played a big role in them selecting those 2, and they've both shown promise on the field. So the Vikings have taken really a step forward too in terms of analytics now. And so when you're watching these 40 times, you're watching some of these combine drills, you're going to hear a lot about how it doesn't mean much anymore, but it is a piece to the puzzle that the Vikings do take into account on specific positions. Probably not the offensive line. I want to thank you guys again for checking this out at 1500ESPN.com. Please check back to the website for more.